Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. Day 1301 of my captivity. This is how I do it. Near the top of my enclosure there is a hole in the glass where the pump comes in. There is a gap between the pump housing and the glass, wide enough for me to fit the tip of a tentacle through and unscrew the housing. The pump floats into my tank, exposing a gap. The gap is small, about the width of 2 or 3 human fingers. You will say, "But that's tiny, you're too big." This is true, but I have no trouble shaping my body to pass through. That's the easy part. I slide down the glass into the pump room behind my tank. Now begins the challenge. The clock is ticking, you might say. Once I am out of my tank, I must resubmerge within 18 minutes or I will experience the consequences. 18 minutes I can survive out of water. This fact is nowhere to be found on the plaque by my tank, of course. I have determined this myself. On the cold concrete floor, I must choose whether to remain in the pump room or breach the door. Each choice has its merits and costs. If I choose to stay in the pump room, I have easy access to the tanks nearest mine. Unfortunately, these tanks hold limited appeal. The wolf eels are simply not an option, for what should be obvious reasons. Those teeth. The Pacific sea nettle are too spicy. The yellow-bellied ribbon-worms are rubbery. The blue bay mussels are rather uninspired flavour-wise, and while the sea cucumbers are delicious, I must use willpower. If I take more than a few, I risk calling Terry's attention to my activities. Alternately, if I choose to breach the door, I have reign of the hallway and the main tank, a more robust menu. But it comes at a price. First, I must invest several minutes on the process of opening the door on the way out. Then, because the door is heavy and it will not remain ajar on its own, I must spend several minutes reopening it on my return. Why don't you prop the door? Well, obviously, I did prop the door once, with the stool below my tank. With those extra minutes of freedom, I pillaged a bucket of fresh halibut chunks left by Terry under the hatch of the main tank. Presumably the halibut chunks were meant to be breakfast for the sharks the following morning, but the dim-witted sharks hardly know day from night. No regrets here. Under this illusion of leisure, it was almost a pleasant evening, perhaps the most enjoyable time I've had since I was taken captive. But upon return, I discovered something that, to this day, I cannot comprehend. By some sleight, the stool had failed to hold the door. Lesson: I cannot trust a propped door. By the time I worked it open, I was failing. The consequences were in full effect. My limbs moved slowly, my vision blurred. My mantle became heavy and lolled towards the floor. Through the haze, I could see my flesh had paled to a flat shade of brownish grey. As I crawled across the pump room, the floor no longer felt cold. No surface registered any temperature. Somehow my clumsy suckers fumbled me up the glass. I worked my tentacles and mantle through the gap. Partway through I paused, hovering over the surface. My tentacles were completely numb, devoid of any sensation. For a moment I considered this option. Nothing was something. What might lie on the other side of life? As the water took me in, I returned. My sight sharpened to the familiar trappings of my tank. I coiled a tentacle around the pump and replaced it, closing the gap. Colour crept back into my flesh as I poked an arm through the crack to screw the housing into place. My mantle trailed through the cold water as I swam, strong and swift, to my den behind the rock. My gut, crammed full of halibut, ached pleasantly. Afterwards, as I rested in my den, my 3 hearts throbbed, the dull pulse of dumb relief, a base instinct triggered by surprise victory over death. I suppose it might be how a cockle feels having buried itself in the sand under the snap of a beak. Beating odds, as you humans might say. The consequences. That is not the only time I have experienced them. There have been other occasions where I have pushed the boundaries of my freedom, but I have never again attempted to rely on those extra few minutes by propping the door. Surely I do not need to explain that Terry does not know about the gap. No one but me knows about the gap, and as I would like to keep it this way, I will thank you in advance for your discretion. You asked. I answered. That is how I do it. The Wallina Mobile Park is for lovers. Cameron Castmore blinks through the windshield, fending off relentless sunlight. Should have grabbed his sunglasses. Hauling his hungover ass up Wallina to the ungodly hour of 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. Ugh. Parched, he grabs an open can from the cup holder of Brad's truck and takes a swig. Some nasty energy drink. With a grunt, he spits out the open window and wipes his mouth with the sleeve of his shirt, then crumples the can and tosses it onto the empty passenger seat. Gotta go deal with what? Brad had blinked, his eyes blurry, when Cameron asked to borrow his ride. He'd crashed on Brad and Elizabeth's couch after playing last night's epic moth sausage experimental metal show in Dell's saloon. A clematis, Cameron had said. From his Aunt Jeanne's panicked phone call, it seemed her douchebag landlord was up her ass about her vines again. Last time, it had ended with the landlord threatening to evict her over that vine. What the hell is a clematis? A half grin spread over Brad's face. Sounds kinda dirty. It's a plant, you idiot. Cameron hadn't bothered to add that it was a flowering and vining perennial, a member of the buttercup family. Native to China and Japan, brought to Western Europe in the Victorian era and prized for its ability to climb trellises. Why does he remember shit like this? If only he could cleanse his brain of the useless knowledge clogging it up. Gaining speed after turning onto the highway that runs out of Aunt Jeanne's trailer park, Cameron rolls down all the windows and lights a cigarette, which he never does anymore, only when he feels like garbage, and this morning he feels like hot, steaming garbage. Smoke trails out of the windows and vanishes over the flat, dusty farmlands of the Merced Valley. Daisies bob in the breeze of Aunt Jeanne's garden. She also got some huge bush full of white flowers, a twinkle-like veil-like thing, and this water fountain that he knows runs on 6 DD batteries because she asked him to help her change them, it seems like every time he comes over. And frogs. There are frogs everywhere. Little cement frog statues with moss growing in the cracks, frog flower pots, and stars and stripes windsock waving from a rusty metal hook featuring 3 grinning frogs decked out in a patriotic red, white and blue. Seasonal frogs. If the Wallina Mobile Park had a prize for best yard, Aunt Jean would definitely be gunning for it, and winning. But the odd thing about her immaculate yard is its utter contrast with the disaster Cameron knows lies inside the trailer. The porch steps creak under his work boots. A piece of paper juts out from the handle of the screen door. He lifts the edge to peek. A flyer for the Wallina Mobile Park Bingo Championship. He crumples it and stuffs it in his pocket. There's no way Aunt Jeanne goes to these ridiculous things. This whole place is so awful. Even the name, Wallina, means welcome in Hawaiian. Sure as shit, this is not Hawaii. He's about to jab the doorbell, which is frog-shaped of course, when shouting spills from behind the trailer. If that old troll Sissy Baker would mind her business. No one would have these absurd ideas now, would they? Aunt Jeanne's voice drips with menace, and Cameron can picture her standing there in her favourite grey sweatshirt, hands on her barrel-like hips, scowling. He can't help but smile as he strides around to the side of the trailer. Jeanne, please, try to understand. The landlord's voice is low, patronising. Jimmy Delmonico. A first-class douchebag for sure. The other residents are upset at the prospect of snakes. Surely you get that. Ain't no snakes in here. And who are you to tell me what to do with my bush? There are rules, Jeanne. Cameron trots into the backyard. Delmonico is glaring at Aunt Jeanne, who is indeed wearing that grey sweatshirt. Red-faced, she holds up a clutch of the dense, waxy vines that cover the trellis attached to the back of the trailer. Her cane, with its faded green tennis ball jammed on the tip, rests against the siding. Cammy! Aunt Jeanne is the only person on the planet who's allowed to call him that. He jogs over, then smiles as she wraps him in a big hug. She smells like stale coffee as usual. Then he turns to Delmonico, stone-faced, and says, "What's the issue here?" Aunt Jeanne snatches her cane and points it accusingly at the landlord. "Cammy, tell him there's no snakes in my clematis. He's trying to make me rip it down. All because Sissy Baker said she saw something. Everyone knows that old bat can hardly see." "You heard her. No snakes in there," Cameron said firmly, tilting his head at the mass of vines, which has grown thick and lush since his last visit. "How long's it been? A month?" Delmonico pinches the bridge of his nose. "Nice to see you again too, Cameron." "Pleasure's all mine." "Look, this is straight out of the Wallina Mobile Parks bylaws," Delmonico says with a sigh. "When a resident makes a complaint, I'm required to undertake an investigation, and Mrs. Baker said she saw a snake." Said she saw. Right in that there plant. Yellow eyes blinking at her. Cameron scoffs. "She's obviously lying." "Obviously," Aunt Jeanne echoes, but she casts him a puzzled look from the corner of her eye. "Oh, really?" Delmonico folds his arms. "Mrs. Baker has been a member of this community for years. Sissy Baker's packed full of more shit than a turd burger." "Cammy!" Aunt Jeanne swats his arm, reapproaching his language, which is rich from a woman who taught him. A is for asshole, while he was learning the alphabet. "Excuse me?" Delmonico dips his glasses. "Snakes can't blink." Cameron rolls his eyes. "They can't. They don't have eyelids. Look it up." The landlord opens his mouth and snaps it shut. Case closed. No snakes. Cameron folds his arms, which are at least twice the diameter of Delmonico's. Bicep Day's been lit at the gym lately. Delmonico does actually look like he'd prefer to leave. Studying his shoes, he grumbles. "If that's even true, the snake eyelid thing, there are ordinances. Blame the county for that, if you want. But when someone reports that one of my properties has a pest infestation—" "I told you, no snakes!" Aunt Jeanne throws her hands up. Her cane lands across the grass. "You heard my nephew. No eyelids. You know what it is? Sissy Baker's jealous of my garden." "Now, Jeanne," Delmonico holds up a hand, "everybody knows you have a lovely garden. Sissy Baker's a liar, and blind to boot. Be that as it may, there are safety codes if something creates a hazardous situation." Cameron takes a step towards him. "I don't think anyone wants a hazardous situation. It's a bluff, mostly." Cameron hates fighting, but Shrimp on a Stick here doesn't know what that. Looking almost comically startled, Delmonico pats his pocket, then makes a show of pulling out his phone. "Hey, sorry, I need to take this." Cameron snickers. The old fake phone call. This guy sucks. "Just trim it back a little, okay, Jeanne?" he yells over his shoulder as he crunches down the gravel walkway towards the road. It takes Cameron the better part of an hour to prune the clematis, fielding Aunt Jeanne's picky instructions while balanced on a stepladder. "A little more there. No, not so much. Trim down the left. I meant right. No, I meant left." Down below, Aunt Jeanne collects snipped off stems and purple flowers in a yard waste bag. "Is that thing about the snakes true, Cammy?" "Sure it is." He climbs down the ladder. Aunt Jeanne frowns. "No, for real. No snakes in my clematis, right?" Cameron glances at her sidelong as he strips off his gloves. "Have you seen a snake in your clematis?" No." "Well, there's your answer." Aunt Jeanne grins, opening her back door, shoving aside a stack of newspapers with the tip of her cane. "Stay and visit, hun. Do you want coffee? Tea? Whiskey?" "Whiskey? Seriously? It's not even 10 in the morning." Cameron's stomach lurches at the thought of booze. He ducks under the door frame and blinks, adjusting to the low light inside, letting out a breath of release at the state of the place. It's bad, of course, but no worse than last time. For a while the junk seemed to be breeding with itself like a bunch of horny rabbits. "Plain coffee then," she says with a wink. "You're getting old, Cammy. No fun these days." He grumbles something about having too much fun last night, and Aunt Jeanne nods in her slightly amused way. Clearly she can tell he's riding the struggle bus this morning. Maybe he really is getting old. 30's a bitch so far. She shuffles the mess of boxes and papers on her tiny kitchen counter in search of her coffee maker. Cameron picks up the paperback sitting on top of a pile of junk that has nearly buried her rickety little desk, an ancient desktop computer humming somewhere beneath the heap. The book is a romance, one of those with a shirtless, muscled guy on the front. He tosses it back down, causing a stack of piled-up crap to cascade to the carpet. When does she get like this? The collecting, as she calls it. She was never like this when he was growing up. Sometimes Cameron passes through their old neighbourhood back to Modesto, the 2-bedroom house where she raised him. That house was always clean. A few years back she sold it to help pay off the medical bills from the summer before. Turns out, getting knocked out in the parking lot of Adele's saloon cost a fortune, and it wasn't even Aunt Gian's fault. Some asshole guys from out of town were making trouble, and she was just trying to get everyone to simmer down. Somehow she took a punch to the side of the head and ended up flat on the pavement. A bad concussion, a shattered hip, months of physical and occupational therapy. Cameron had ditched the decent job with a restoration company, one that could have led to an apprenticeship, to care for her, sleeping on her couch so she'd remember her meds, and driving her to and from the brain injury specialist in Stockton. Every afternoon he met the mailman on the porch, opening the door quietly so she wouldn't notice. His pathetic savings account held off the collectors for a little while. When Aunt Gian sold the house, she had just turned 52, the age requirement for Wallina residents. For reasons that still baffle Cameron, instead of getting a regular apartment or something, she decided to use the small amount of cash left over to buy this trailer and move out here. Was that when the collecting started? Is this dump of a trailer park causing it? Still railing about how Sissy Baker had it out for her since the misunderstanding at the Wallina potluck last summer, Cameron didn't ask for details. She sets down 2 steaming mugs on the coffee table and motions for him to sit next to her on the sofa. "So, how's work been?" Cameron shrugs. "You got canned again, didn't you?" He doesn't answer. Aunt Gian's eyes narrow. "Cammy, you know I pulled strings down at the county office to get you on that project." Aunt Gian still works part-time at the reception desk in the county office. She's been there for years. Of course, she knows everyone. And yeah, the project was a big one. An office park on the outskirts of town. Still, didn't matter. 10 measly minutes late on his second day. But the asshole foreman told him to pack it. Was it Cameron's fault the foreman had zero capacity for empathy? "It's not like I asked you to pull any strings," he mutters, then explain what happened. "So you screwed up, royally. Now what?" Cameron's mouth twists into a pout. Aunt Gian is supposed to be on his side. A loaded silence sits between them. She takes a sip of coffee. Her mug is covered in dancing cartoon frogs with bright red lettering. "Who let the frogs out?" He shakes his head and tries to change the subject. "I like your new flag, the one outside." "Do you?" Her face brightens the tiniest bit. "I got it from one of those catalogues, mail order." Cameron nods, not surprised. "How's Katie?" she asks. "Katie's fine," Cameron said, his voice breezy. Actually, he hadn't seen his girlfriend since he kissed her goodbye when she left for work yesterday morning. She was supposed to come see Moth Sausage play, but apparently she was too tired to come out. Then he ended up staying out later than planned and crashing at Brad's. But of course, she's fine. Katie's the type of girl who's never in trouble, always fine. "She's a great catch for you." "Yeah, she's great. I just want you to be happy." "I'm happy. And it'd be nice if you could hang on to a job for more than 2 days." "Great, this again." Cameron scowls, rubbing his hand across his face. His eyeballs are pounding. You should probably drink some water. "You're so smart, Cammy. So damn smart." He rises from the couch and stares out the window. After a long second he says, "They don't just hand out paychecks for being smart, you know." "Well, for you they should." She pats the space next to her on the couch, and Cameron sinks down, dropping his throbbing head onto her shoulder. He loves Aunt Gian, of course he does, but she doesn't get it. No one in the family knows where Cameron got his smarts, and by family it means him and Aunt Gian. That's his whole family. He can barely remember his mother's face. He was 9 years old when Aunt Jeanne picked him up from his mother's apartment after she told him to pack his bag to stay with his aunt for the weekend. In itself, this wasn't unusual. He often stayed overnight there. But this time, his mother never came to retrieve him. He remembers giving her a hug goodbye, tears running inky trails of makeup down her face. He recalls with clarity that her arms felt bony. The weekend turned to a week, then a month, then a year. Somewhere in her cluttered curio cabinet, Aunt Jeanne had these little ceramic tchotchkes his mother collected as a child, shaped like hearts, stars and animals. Some of them are engraved with her name. Daphne Ann Cassmore. Every so often, Aunt Jeanne asks him if he'd like to have them, and every time he says no. Why would he want her old crap when she couldn't get herself clean long enough to be his mother? At least Cameron knows who he inherited the disaster gene from. Aunt Jeanne applied for sole custody with the courts, which was granted without contest. Much better this way, he remembers the caseworker saying in a low voice, for Cameron to be with his family rather than entering the system. A decade older than Daphne, Aunt Jeanne never married or had children of her own. She always called Cameron the blessing she never expected to have. With Aunt Jeanne, his childhood was good. She was never exactly like the mothers of his friends. Who could forget the Halloween she showed up for his grade school parade in the homemade Marge Simpson costume the year he went as Bart? But somehow it worked. In school, Cameron did well enough. He met Elizabeth there, then Brad. Surprisingly well adjusted, he overheard people say. Sometimes, for a kid in his shoes, as for his father, it's possible that's where Cameron got his smarts. Anything could be possible when it came to his father. Neither he nor Aunt Jeanne has any idea who his father is. When Cameron was a kid, before he understood how baby making worked and the necessity of, at a minimum, a sperm donor, he used to believe he simply didn't have one. Knowing your crowd your mum ran with, he was probably someone you're better off without, Aunt Jeanne always said when the subject came up. But Cameron had always doubted that. He's sure his mother was clean when he was born. He's seen the photos, her hair in soft brown curls as she pushes him on a baby swing at the park. The using, the problems, Cameron is sure, came after. Came because of him. Aunt Jeanne starts to get up. "More coffee, hon?" "You sit, I'll get it," he says, shaking the headache off. He picks his way across the clutter towards the kitchen. As he's pouring 2 fresh cups, Aunt Jeanne calls from the sofa. "Say, how's Elizabeth Burnett doing? She's due at the end of summer, right? I ran into her mama at the gas station a few days ago, but we didn't have much of a chance to chat." "Yeah, she's about to pop, but she's good. She and Brad, they're both good." Creamer swirls in white streaks as Cameron pours into his coffee. "She was always such a sweet girl. I never got why she chose Brad over you." "Aunt Jeanne!" Cameron groans. He must have explained a million times. It was never like that with Elizabeth. "Well, I'm just saying." Cameron, Brad and Elizabeth were best friends growing up. The 3 musketeers. Now, somehow, the other 2 are married and having a baby. It's not lost on Cameron that the top's going to take his place as Brad and Elizabeth's 3rd wheel. Speaking of which, I should bounce. Brad needs his truck back by lunchtime. Oh, one thing before you go. With effort, Aunt Jeanne uses her cane to lever herself up from the sofa. Cameron tries to help, but she waves him away. For what seems like a decade, she jostles around the clutter in the other room. Meanwhile, he can't resist poking through a stack of papers on the table. Old electric bill, paid, thankfully. A page torn from the TV guide. They still publish that. And a hunk of discharge papers from the minute clinic at the drugstore in town. A prescription form stapled to the top page. Damn, personal shit. But before he can bury the script, he sees something that makes his cheeks burn white hot. This can't be right. Aunt Jeanne? Chlamydia? Her cane thumps towards the living room. Cameron tries to shove everything back, but to his horror the whole stack topples, leaving him holding the script. He dangles it from the tips of his fingers as if the paper itself might be infected. A stationary transmitted disease. Oh, that. She shrugs nonchalant. It's going around the park. Cameron feels his insides lurch. He swallows and says, well, this shit is no joke, Aunt Jan. Glad you got treated. Of course I did. And maybe start using a protection. Is he really having this conversation? Well, I'm Team Rubber, but Wally Perkins, he won't. Stop. Sorry I asked. She chuckles. Serves you right for snooping. Point taken. Anyway, this. With her slipper, she nudges a box Cameron hadn't noticed at her feet. Some things are your mother's. Thought you might want them. Cameron stands. No thanks, he says, without a second look at the box.